Okay.
Yeah, okay. So, welcome. Really nice to be here, and just reflecting really how after all of your little intros. So, thanks for sharing. Um, so where to start really? I was the founding member of a permaculture designed intentional community called Chicken Shack, which we started in 1995. I started dreaming about it in about 1992, and in 1994 I started really seriously trying to think about how can you access land, build community, especially if you don't have money, and how do you do it if you don't have capital. And the short answer of it is you join networks and you build teams and you create a common sort of long-term vision. Getting Mike.
1 second, we have a problem. Steph, Steph, are you there? We seem to have sound predominating from your.
It's gone off
I
now.
think that might have gone now. Okay.
Well done, Matt. Yeah. And so I wanted just to say that because I really want you to know it's possible. And if you can have a common vision, and it actually flows from having, yes, a collective common vision based on a overlapping set of values. If you can communicate that and you can agree that with a group of people, then you can do these things. You don't have to build it from scratch. You don't have to do a one planet development. There are many ways into it. What we did was we found a rundown, slightly tired, worked out farm without buildings, moved into the main house and then slowly renovated it all. We had 8 people, and we created a fully mutual housing co-op. I lived there for 13 years. I moved away in, I think, 2008. And so next year it would have been going longer without me than with me. And because it is still going. So that also shows the possibility of what we can do with communities and stuff. So I want to say that as an opening sort of salvo, is to say, you know, the instincts that you're having in terms of a work together to sort of face increasing adversities out there, that's out there, is the best thing that we can do is to form cooperatives, form mutually beneficial relationships, form alliances, um, and then and begin to meet more of our own needs from local resources, from the skills. We need to start to become producers, not just consumers. And part of the journey of to achieve that is to consume a whole lot less as well. And it's quite easy to start. Look at all the things in your life that are totally extraneous and totally unsustainable. Start pruning them away and just feel the weight, fall away almost, and then start to think about where you can be proactive. And permaculture is about having a plan. It takes time. There's no instant solution. It's not a magic bullet. It's not like you just say this word and suddenly everything's fine. You accept that we're starting from a very, very difficult place. And we're also starting from right in the heart of the beast, is that United Kingdom is the heart of the imperial empire, if you like. We, think colonialism, slavery, extracted wealth from a globalized world, the sort of that Britain first kind of, Rule Britannia kind of thing, offshore banking, City of London, people earning money for what? Exactly what are they doing? How does that, it struck me that, the pirates that sailed over the Atlantic and stole the gold bullion, what did they do with it? They stuck it in holes in the ground, desert islands, treasure islands. These are offshore banking. Sometimes I realize that we sort of caught up in anyway, I don't want to get too into all of that, but it's like we're doing it from the UK. We're at the heart of the beast. So if the fact that it's really difficult and seems scary and overwhelming, don't be too surprised by that. Okay, so I want to kind of whiz through two themes, two slideshows that I put together. We'll see how we get on. One is some larger, broader principles about, well, what the hell is permaculture and how can it be useful to us in a more theoretical way. Permaculture is actually about seeing patterns. It's about seeing the bigger, wider pattern and finding your place in it. And then, but the other thing I wanted to talk about was the kinds of observations and the kinds of projects that are actually currently involved in. Because I also want to say that permaculture is very much about doing it. It's not about seeing the patterns, working out where the hell we are, and then applying yourself to areas where you can make the most impact. And the areas that you initially can make the most impact are informing yourself better, starting to take a greater control over your sort of, your own habits and diet and exercise, all those sort of things, start to work out from the middle. Okay, so there's two slideshows. The first one, this is like a general introduction to permaculture, and a little plug. So I don't know, I've been doing this for quite a long time. I got involved in permaculture in Zimbabwe in 1991. I walked into a farm that desperately needed someone to look after it for a while. It happened to be designed using permaculture, and I ended up being caretaker of that farm, and that sent me on this incredible journey that has brought me 30 years later here. I've called that journey Sector 39, and for whatever reasons, that is just a name. The S is me, and 3 and 9 are just very interesting numbers. If you add them together, they make 12. And permaculture is made of 12 principal ideas that sit on top of 3 core ethics. It's both a very high defined thing, but also a very loose thing that can evolve and grow. It's a pattern language for understanding change. I'll go to this slideshow first and just say, so oh, actually wrong one. I'm going to confuse myself. Maybe this is actually too difficult. I'll stick with this for a bit. Okay, so here we go. This is what nature does all by itself. This is a tropical tropical forest in rainforest in Uganda. It's pretty much on the equator. It's about 4,000 feet above sea level, about the height of Ben Nevis, and it's a forest system that's got 200 species of birds that are unique to it, and 100 species of butterflies. It's got huge, massive trees. It's got climbing, thousands of species all living together. And the first thing that you can, sort of interesting to think about that is that's nature's pattern. It does that all by itself. So rather than feeling that how the hell everything's so difficult and challenging on this planet, how do we meet our needs and all of these complex things that we put upon ourselves, I have to understand that in its base condition, nature is abundant. Nature can self-assemble to hugely complex ecosystems of thousands of different organisms, all operating together, seemingly independently, but they create an integrated system all of their own. And then the next thing perhaps is to realize is we're only part of that. That we rather stupidly thought somehow put ourselves outside of nature and started to regard that as something that was external to ourselves. And we sort of think about how do we build a relationship with nature. We're enmeshed within it, and that's our biggest error is that we set ourselves all apart from it. And we sort of create these economic ideas that make ourselves see nature as a pile of resources rather than seeing ourselves as integrated within it. Okay, oops. So hardwired into nature, into what seemingly is random things, assembling randomly, is our patterns. And when we look into it, we can identify those patterns, and we see the same patterns everywhere. This is a Fibonacci spiral. It's a very simple mathematical formula. You take the first digit and add it to the second one. If you add 0 and 1 to what together, you get 1. If you add 1 and 1 to 1, you just add. So you just add 1 each time. So to 0 to 1. To 2, to 3, to 5, sorry, to 8, to 13. And actually that creates the optimal pattern for distribution of elements that fulfills a space. So and wherever you look within the universe, you see this Fibonacci spiral, you see the same mathematical formula. And within the heart of permaculture is this realization that all life is responding to the same forces. We're all product of the same energetical, physical, biological forces. And if we can understand those patterns and use that as a design template, then we've got a universal language that can all work together. And suddenly we can cooperate as a whole organism across the whole planet, because we're starting to, if you like, be governed and managed by the same information. And it's information that we derive by observing nature. No one's telling you this. You can figure it out for yourself. And the most profound thing you learn when you discover what study permaculture is this, is that water flows downhill, always, unless you add energy. You can make it go uphill, but you have to do work to do that. Okay, so that turns out to be universally true. Whether you're a Protestant or a Catholic, water flows downhill. If you're a Sunni or a Shia, water flows downhill. It does not matter whether you live in North Korea or South Korea. So if we can observe into nature and realize that there are universal, not even truths, universal observable realities. And so let's create a template, a design template out of that, and we'll work with that. It doesn't matter whether we think that Man United are better than Man City, you know, for us to collaborate around designing a drainage system or something like that, because it's more like designing with logic. So I'm getting carried away, but so nature creates patterns, and the patterns are functional. They do particular things, and the basic so premise within permaculture. If we observe nature, if we use nature as a teacher, what does it tell us? Maybe we can derive ideas from that. So if a pattern works at one scale, nature tends to think it'll work at other scales. If you like, it seems to repeat on itself. And the other thing that does that, something that works, if you have an effective pattern, what tends to happen in nature is that it then repeats that pattern again and again and again. But what's really, really interesting, so this is just the surface of a cactus that we're looking at. And each one of those sort of cactus florets is created by exactly the same biological, physical forces. The same flow of nutrients and genetic information. Everyone is different because everyone formed under with time. There was seasons. It was hotter one day and colder another day, or a bird flew across, or there was a cloud on the sky. So each one experienced the world ever so slightly differently. So here's another thought within permaculture: is that we're all created and governed by these same, actually quite simple forces. But because those forces are interacting with charts, with nature, with the flow of other elements, every single thing is unique. So a central idea within permaculture design is we're not trying to create templates. We're not creating sameness. What we're doing is we're recognizing the same forces, but then each one of those creates uniqueness. So if any one of you were to start gardening, or a few people might, sorry, I'm going to let the cat out. I'm just hassling. Even if we were all given the same resources on the same bit of land, every little bit of land is unique, but we each have different specialities, we have different tastes, we have different priorities. So we would each approach problem solving or building something differently. And that has to be a good thing, not a bad thing. We're not, in permaculture, we recognize, we're being informed by nature that everything is unique. Every one of us is unique. Every situation we're in is unique, but we're all being influenced by the same forces. The sun goes up, the sun goes down. There is gravity, water flows downhill, organic matter decays to compost. These are unique truths. These are a truth to all of us. Nature is a product. Nature works, again, we can derive this through observation. You probably all know what a lichen is. And in fact, I could slow right down here. I'm going straight into all of these like massive ideas. This is the big picture stuff. And I want you to understand that permaculture is like, it's starting with big picture observation. Is we're part of a living, breathing planet, everybody. We all breathe air and water, and and we're all actually being shaped by these same forces. So we need to understand our place within it and stop trying to, I don't know, whatever it is we're trying to do. So nature's a function of relationships. Here's a kind of a universal truth as well, is that everything needs breakfast. I like to say when I'm teaching, life's no fun without breakfast. Or if you skip breakfast, lunch starts to become really important. And at some point in the day where you have to replenish the energy that you're burning. So where's that energy coming from? So you actually, for you to even exist, exchange has to happen. You're not just breathing in and out and oxygen and carbon dioxide relationships happening. Is you are burning energy, you're oxidizing energy. Where's that energy coming from? Well, there's only one source of new energy coming into the system. Okay, slight simplification, but let's keep this on, understandable. And where's that coming from? It's coming from the sun, right? So everything, every living thing has to, except for those things that live down in the hot cracks in the ocean floor and live off geothermal energy and whatever. but all kind of recognizable multicellular life as we know it. In order to live, it gets its energy from the sun. So we have a problem and a challenge there. Is if I put you out in the sun like a lizard on a rock, you get nice and warm, might top up your tan, but you're still going to be hungry at the end of the day. You can't access that energy. You can only access the energy of the sun through plants. And that's because plants have this amazing ability to convert solar energy into through chlorophyll structures in their leaves into sugar, or they knit those sugars together to create long chain carbohydrate molecules, stored energy. And that's what all the living matter, if you like, is built out of. And it's carbon, it's a carbon exchange. So we've got a carbon-based energy system, and we can only access that by building a relationship with plants, because only plants can translate that energy into a storable form. So you can drink milk and eat eggs and keep cows, but at the same time, those animals are only translating the energy of the sun that was trapped through plants into a form that you can digest. So you're still building a relationship with plants. How does the plant access? So it gets its energy from the sun, but how does the plant get its nutrients? This becomes a super interesting thing to think about. And it gives us a real insight into how nature works, is that nature is a function of relationships, mutually beneficial relationships. So here's a plant. Let's consider this plant in this picture. It's some kind of thorny acacia, and it's growing in a park, a wilderness area in Uganda. Just so happens. The only thing that plant can get from the sun is energy. It can't get anything else. So it needs to get the minerals that it needs to grow and to be healthy. It needs to get those from the soil. So how does a plant access nutrients in the soil? Well, here's an interesting thing. I mentioned lichens earlier. I just want to keep this analogy in mind, because it's pretty mind-blowing. Is life began in water, right? Evolution, we're told that first life forms were in water. And you can imagine that, say, a very simple algae, like a unicellular plant, floating in water, maybe in a sort of shallow, warm, nutrient-rich estuary or something, would be very easy for it to you could just absorb the nutrients from the water, dissolve across through the cellular wall of the plant, and there you go, it's got its nutrients. So how's it going to do that on land when it's not in such a situation? And even when we think about that, the next question we might want to ask, and this is a very interesting, again, turns out to be an interesting question to ask, is what was the first organism to live on land? Actually, if life began in the sea, what was the first thing to live on land? And the answer for that is mycelium, fungi. And fungi have the ability to dissolve minerals. They can produce oxalic acid. They're like little strands of little thread-like strands that can penetrate, build a relationship with a rock, and start exuding oxalic acid, which is just two CO2 molecules joined together. It's a mild acid, and from that it can start pulling silica and I don't know what other mineral elements out of the rock. As that rock weathers and cracks, it starts to become soil. And what the next thing happened was that the algae then fused with the mycelium, and we then had composite organisms called lichens. And those lichens because they were plants, they could photosynthesize and get energy, and then it swapped the energy with the fungal component to access the minerals. So that first sort of complex multicellular organism was already a function of two completely different living things. So jump to our acacia tree growing there in the desert is, how does it access the nutrients in the soil? It pumps sugar down to its roots. It gives that sugar off as exudates into the soil, and that draws to get towards it beneficial fungal hyphae. And around that fungal hyphae, you create little environments that are just super for soil bacteria, protozoa, nematodes, and the kind of things that feed off the soil bacteria. And that obviously brings in worms and beetles and things that then start churning the soil and aerating it and creating an environment that's more suitable to the plant. So interestingly, the plant starts to cultivate the soil around it. The plant actually selects the microbes and the fungi that it wants and promotes them by giving off sugars in areas that it's getting the right nutrients back in return. So there's a feedback loop going on within the soil. Now, the next thing we can think about that, so there's a whole bunch of complex interrelationships. For this plant to flourish, it's already built a community around its soil of lots of different kinds of organisms. And within that, they're able to start to create the conditions that favor the plant. So now the plant's thinking longer term. It's thinking, it's not thinking at all, but it's behaving, whatever it is that the plant's doing. It's growing towards the sunlight. It's subdividing. It's creating more edge. It's creating more surface area so it can absorb more sunlight more effectively. But in nature, everything's regulating. Natural systems are self-regulating. This is something else we need to really take into our mindset and understand. This is what permaculture teaches us when we study nature, is that nature has self-regulating systems. So if there was nothing to regulate this thorny acacia, the whole world would be covered in thorny acacia, or wherever, within that climate zone. And and when we look at, and it's a good question to ask, is, well, why is it so thorny? Acacia trees fix nitrogen in the soil as well. So they actually build relationships with a particular soil bacteria called rhizobium, which traps atmospheric nitrogen, which makes the soil more fertile. So there's another beneficial relationship within that. And so the reason why the thorny acacia is so thorny is because it's really tasty, and it's the favorite food of a giraffe. And if you're the favorite food of a giraffe, is you need to be thorny, otherwise you're in all sorts of trouble, because they can eat you. Let's just jump into this picture, look, and this is what fascinated me when I saw this. I maybe think about it in another layer as well. As you see these galls, you'll know what an oak gall is, or you see it's when an insect has laid an egg in the bud of a plant, and that bud, instead of growing into the thing that the tree wanted, it grows into a thing that the insect wanted. And it creates a little, probably carbohydrate-filled ball that the egg can germinate in of the termite, and it eats it all out, and it lives in there. So why would the acacia tree give up its valuable sugars in its buds to this termite? Surely it would want to repel it. And the answer, of course, is it's part of the defense mechanism of the tree. So it has its thorns, but the giraffe has such nimble tongue and lips, it can come in and just strip off all those fresh, juicy young buds. So the tree is prepared to give up 2 or 3 buds to the giraffe, because that helps seed dispersal and nutrient cycling in a longer term. But to stop itself from being destroyed, what happens is when the giraffe starts feeding, the termites will rush out and start defending themselves and squirting formic acid at the giraffe. So it moves on to the next tree and browses on the next tree. So we understand everything's an ecosystem. Everything is self-regulating by different forces, whether we can perceive them or not, or whether we understand them or not. What we start to realize is they're there everywhere. And it's not unique to the lichen or unique to this acacia bush. This is everywhere in nature. Things are self-regulate. And yeah, so I'll take a little pause and go to the other slideshow in a minute, I think, just before I get too much into this. But is everybody following this? I'm not going too wild and fast. Okay. So I showed you that forest before, and we just talked about what nature's doing there, naturally or whatever. And here, this is an indent on top of a huge boulder. So another, it happened to be in Uganda again. And all it is a little puddle, obviously fills up with water when it rains, and it doesn't quite dry out, and by the time it rains next. And slowly we've got a few plants just blowing in on the wind, and they've seeded and they're starting to grow. They're catching and storing energy, catching the sun from the energy. And as they live and die, they're creating humus and compost, and actually creating opportunity for more sophisticated plants to come along afterwards. They're actually building a habitat. And if you looked at that sort of through your microscope, you look at that's only a little puddle with a couple of little, herbaceous plants growing in it. But you can imagine at a different scale, that could be the huge Lake Victoria with a jungle growing on it. And again, it's like patterns, the same processes are happening at every scale. So even on a micro scale, this process of nature is building, creating habitat, creating niches, catching and storing energy, building soil. So take that as a metaphor for what you're doing. You're trying to create a different kind of ecosystem, an ecosystem that includes you. In the same processes, you're trying to catch the energy that's flowing through you and around you, and you're going to try and direct some of that into places and ways in which it can start to create a more harmonious environment. just like that acacia tree is doing. And if we're trying to design, kind of consciously design things, what we have to do is we understand we're trying to deliberately create mutually beneficial relationships. So the more you can build. So here's another recognition with the permaculture. We're all trying to meet our own needs. The thing that comes most important to me, it's me, but only up to the point when I'm, clothed and fed and, whatever, rested, and then I've got time and energy for everybody else. So it's absolutely fine to start with yourself and recognize everyone is doing that. But we also have this ethic of you set limits to your own consumption. And as you start to recognize you're meeting your own needs, you then look to think about how can I help community meet its own needs? How can I help the environment meet its needs? How can I find a mutually beneficial place within that? And understand that by doing that, you're creating an environment that you actually want to live in. So it feeds back to you. So, and you can then take this metaphor of succession and apply it to all different kind of growing systems and gardens and forests and community gardens and design systems, and think about how you can move from very simple monoculture systems that we have today to complex polyculture systems where everything's connected to everything else, where we've got lots and lots of different kinds of habitats and opportunities to catch and store solar energy and express it in a different form, and then build a relationship between all of the elements in that system, just like in the rainforest, just like in a natural system. Natural systems contain bacteria, lots and lots of bacteria, mycelium and protozoa and worms and birds and mammals and and all sorts of different kinds of plants, and they're all is somehow interconnected, and they're all somehow part of a joined up process of holding that solar flux of energy in a space where it's useful, where it's helping nutrient cycle, plants grow, and everybody feed themselves. This is a couple of pictures of a community garden we've been working in Llanfachlin over a few years on just a bit of overgrazed tired pasture. We designed a system. We worked with the community, lots of different ways to be able to bring diversity back into this place, to try and create a self-replicating pattern that's recognizable and unique, to bring together lots of different units, elements that could function together as a system. And when you create community spaces, that helps bring community together, but then builds relationships between people. So I'm really interested in how we can use landscapes and planting. So this garden in Llanfachlin has got 100 apple trees in. Everyone is a different variety, and they're all like a Welsh heritage variety. We've underplanted it with soft fruits and herbs and wildflowers and create, and the idea is, again, just using these very simple permaculture ideas about diversity and linking elements together in a ways in which they become systems, functional systems. So we've grown a surplus of coppice, this is willow, so we can now use that to build the garden, create the resources you need from within the space that you're working. Then you don't have to do any transportation. Also, when we design and think about systems like this, we tend to think about how it would evolve over time, and how even if we walk away from this, it would just biodegrade away and leave a diversity of species. Or if we keep managing it, we can make it more and more pretty and complex. And also, when we designed this system, we thought about ways to attract relationship with the people who are walking around it, as dog walkers and parents of toddlers and stuff use this space as a community space. So we made a play, a living den, or lots of tactile plants that you could smell and touch and taste, and create ways in which the people in the community can have a relationship with the garden. Anyway, so just a few sort of opening thoughts on these sort of core ideas behind permaculture. Can we learn from nature? Can we see the patterns and the things that drive it? And then can we then apply them in a way in which we can meet our needs in line with the community meeting its needs, and in a way in which we're really speaking to this principle of natural regeneration, of working with the fact that nature wants to move to complexity. And we throw loads of energy at it to try and simplify it all the time, to turn it back into lawns instead of it being forests. This is our little cooperative in Llanrydder and Mochnant. We started 6 years ago now, coming up to 6 years ago. And we're 3 people and 2 cats and a dog and a little shop, all in in a building in the village square in Llanrhider, and we try to bring together people who want to work for community, want to do permaculture, want to learn how to apply these ideas in a joined up way. So, so I thought there's a bit of theory, and then I'll just tell you a little bit about what I've been doing in the last year or two, and kind of seeing how, because it's been this incredible journey that I've been on this time, and in the process met lots of people, and it creates a synergy. Matt and Katie here just in the window, and Steph, that your paths cross and intertangle all these other people, and in the same way that what's going on in the soil with the mycelium, there's a nutrient exchange, there's a reinforcing of flows of energy in some way. I think the mycelial net within the soil is a really fantastic metaphor for for community, and the nodes of growth and replication of the mushrooms, the thing that come out and throw the spores of new ideas out there. I think there's an enormous change underway in the world right now, and I think that it's even hard for us to, even people who are really thinking about change a lot, to keep up with it, because all the kind of rules of engagement are changing. So, and that's scary actually, is when a lot of familiar things start to fall apart, and the sort of concepts that we've relied on for a very long time. But all of that is symbolic of we're very rapidly moving to a different place, and that's because everything about what we were doing before was not sustainable. And if you try and sustain something that's unsustainable forever, as it collapses, and we're kind of seeing elements of that happening. Well, let's say contracts. Collapse sounds very dramatic. It contracts, and it goes back to, people say, well, what happened to the Mayans? This amazing civilization, 4th century, 9th century AD. What happened to them? They're still there. They just contracted. They just couldn't sustain it at that scale anymore. So we need to think about these things too, because we're facing that, especially with our sort of Western paradigm. So Sector 39 started, actually, the first forest garden that I built as a permaculture, that's not even true, actually, it was at Chicky Chat. But anyway, I'll simplify the story a bit. I built a garden at 39 London Street, Reading, on a roof, a forest garden, put on the roof of a community centre. And it was kind of a statement about what's possible. I did this in 2002 to 2005. And after that project finished, I was looking to a way to take the ideas and inspiration from that project and out into the world and multiply it. And the numerology of 39 interested me. It's 3 and 3 squared. It represents this kind of exponential growth. And I reckon that's the kind of change that we have to make. The world's got to kind of wake up at the same time and somehow work out how to coordinate action to avoid this terrible climate catastrophe or ecological disaster, however you want to frame it, microplastic hell, that we're manifesting upon ourselves because we fail to observe the rules of nature. So this is our permaculture training team in 2018. And this is our Wales, Uganda, and Kenyan actually a team. And it's been great in the last 6 years to realize that permaculture really is a global phenomenon, and that is really rapidly taking off, actually much faster in countries where people are closer to the land, countries where people have less welfare systems, and countries where people have, in some degree, I don't know, they're less married to this economic engine as we are, so, for better or worse. So that's been interesting. What about this universal pattern language of permaculture? Something that fascinates me, because it's also like some of you might say, well, what the hell am I going to be teaching in Uganda? What do I know about Uganda? Nothing. What do I know about tropical agriculture? Nothing. What have I got to contribute to being there? And I kind of was asking myself the same question, really. But the truth is they know the detail. They know how to grow bananas and mangoes and stuff like that. I don't need to tell them that. There's nothing that I could know that they can't know about that. But what I do know is, because I've had, a wider experience, more chance to reflect on things, learn to see the wider patterns and see how things fit in. And Uganda's it's the second youngest country in the world. Median age there is 15, and the population is in the process of doubling. So work it out. You're going to have 2/3 of the population being of school age. So who's going to be the teachers? It's also a country that's in the process of deciding its fate. They haven't built any motorways yet. They haven't gone into a fixed line telephone scheme or mainstream sewerage. They've got a chance to go in another direction. It's a really fascinating place to have been working, to be honest. And the people I've met there have really expanded my thinking, and I think it's one of the most vibrant places in the world because they've got the most resource in the world, which is people, young, enthusiastic, educated people who are all on the internet. And they've got 70 languages in Uganda, but anyone who's educated can speak English, and that's quite a thing that they've got. So that's my colleague Stella, and she is looking at the famous Niero rock paintings in I don't know, 3,000-year-old rock painting, and I don't know what it says, but it's a pattern. And you actually want to think, how would you communicate an idea across cultures, across millennia? Would you write it in a piece of words, or would you draw a picture? Would you draw a pattern? And when I look into that, I start to see the same kind of interconnected worlds within worlds model that I think that we certainly, how we see world in permaculture. And that's just me, obviously imposing my ideas on it, but then isn't that the powerful power of symbology? So anyway, it's interesting. I'm interested in these universal themes and things that link us together. I'm not interested in the things that divide us. So repeating patterns, there's our kind of, and each pattern repeated is unique. And if you cluster things together, which we seem to see a lot of in nature, they become much stronger. So here, look, you can imagine each one of these little things would be a little family group, and they've got their own little functional space with whatever it is that they need, their little support all the family functions. But by clustering them together, they're much stronger. And also by clustering them together, so we've obviously got a place where they keep their cattle in the evening in the middle, where they're nicely protected, is we can cluster things together with design, so we create lots of different kinds of spaces for different functions to happen. We've got the safe people creating a safe space for animals, and we've got the gardens and things around. So whether these people think in terms of permaculture, they have ever heard that word or not, is that obviously doing it, they have some kind of functional pattern language, and they're applying it, and they're using the resources that are lying around. Everything's made out of sticks and straw and mud and plants and things. So you can't say, well, there's a shortage of resources, because you're using the resources that are there, that you're self-generating on site. So again, permaculture, we try to say, if you could just work with what you've got, you can create abundance. You don't need to go outside to be constantly drawing in external resources. These are just obviously applications of ideas. So we live, you might have noticed, we live in this time of collapsing paradigms, maybe, that we created an economic model, the world's just resources, and we can have GDP growth forever, and the purpose of existence is to consume things and throw them away, rather than to tune in with sort of cyclical nature and energy sort of abundance of nature itself. So because of that, we've created any number of crises that you want to choose that. And what's happening now is that we're being confronted with reality. We're being hit many, many ways, whether it's with these, imagine being in Texas and suddenly everything's minus 20, it's hot in Texas. They're not prepared for it. Think of our non-localized food systems and how vulnerable they are to economic disruption or to extreme weather events. And then add all those things together. Imagine on Haiti, Puerto Rico, they're completely bust. Neoliberal economics has meant that they owe billions and billions of dollars. Then they're hit by a massive tropical cyclone, which destroys most of their infrastructure. And then they have one of the worst outbreaks of coronavirus. And you sort of think they sort of layer upon layer of crises. And we've got to build resilience very quickly to understand that we're not going to build back to what it was. We've got to really have a vision for something different going forward. And I think we know about all of these things that we're in. So obviously this whole viral storm that we've been experiencing, this has not come out of a vacuum. This comes out of the fact that we're eroding into nature at a very rapid rate. We're coming into contact with all sorts of genetic material that we've never come close to before. We're exposing ourselves because we've taken away all of this, if you like, stripped away all the layers of nature. There's almost nothing left. And this image is almost funny with someone with these little banana leaf thing, but it's not funny because there's also this terrible inequality between the first world and the third world, or developing world, majority world. to access resources. So as we eat into the ecological capital of the planet, we destabilize the climate, destabilize the weather systems, the soil systems, these biological feedback loops, and then we try and use the money and privilege that we gain from that to protect ourselves from it. And we just realize is this isn't right. This isn't the right way forward. We really got to think differently. This is the I think for me, one of the most interesting things I've come across, some kind of philosophy and whatever, is the I Ching, the Chinese book of change. So Taoist philosophy about the flow, finding harmony with life. How do we move with these sort of natural energetic forces? And somehow if we can do that, we can achieve so much more without being in constant conflict. And the I Ching, the book of changes, is about recognizing that change itself, it seems random, but it also conforms to patterns in the same way that seasons conform to patterns and cycles. And so we have to, if we can recognize where we are within a cycle, it's not like the world is ending. It's like, no, the sun's going down, it's coming up again tomorrow. We learn to observe those patterns. There's many more subtle patterns going on as well. So change is inevitable. This is something deep within permaculture recognition and within this philosophy is that change is inevitable, but change is a cycle, and we have to move with it, not fight against it. And this is about ways of seeing. I thought it's one of the most interesting images I saw last year. It's of a blue-ringed octopus, and I thought it's so interesting. It's distraction, because you see the blue rings are so bright you fail to see the body. And it's a bit like the world that we're in. We're looking at these little dots of detail and going, wow, that's so incredible, but we're completely missing the bigger point. And the bigger point might be that we're all part of an interconnected ecosystem or something like that. And instead, we're all just too excited with our own individuality. I don't know if that works or not, but it made me think a lot. Thinking differently. I don't know if buildings that look like that is the solution or not. There's probably lots of ecological footprint in the construction costs, but I still like this idea of this is what nature would choose to do. Every surface is interacting with atmosphere. It's collecting sunlight. It's filtering water. It's cleaning the air. Everything, every surface is part of this interaction with the living, breathing biosphere. So I want us to think like that. Think that every surface should be, we should be catching and storing energy, holding water, building nutrients, building soil, capturing carbon. Hey, do you know how you run back reverse climate change? Is you capture carbon and you put it in the soil. Well, what captures carbon and grows in soil? Oh, that would be plants. Build a relationship with plants. You know, once you realize that all of these things we can, I think it's absolutely possible to run the whole system backwards, if I can turn it, make it abundant again. And once we start to turn that corner, we're going to enter a completely different realm, a whole world of possibilities, rather than, oh, everything's collapsing. Oh, we can't keep the car industry going and the jet plane industry is failing. Well, yes, I think we always know that. Can we see the world differently? I love the image of the blue marble. You know, we got back from the Apollo 14 or whatever it was mission, and we saw the Earth in space, and it made us understand we're all part of a planet and we were one breathing, living, breathing, interconnected system. I think this is a more modern sort of world map. And I think in another way, it's inviting us to see our place within this bigger system. We're so Eurocentric, or in our worldview, and to realize that we're just part of this huge, complex, diverse, human and biological system, and we're just obsessed with tiny little bits of it, as if the rest didn't matter. And I think we have to re-embrace the majority world back into our worldview. Stop thinking like first worlders, and stop, Black lives really do matter. But what about the First Nation people? What about thinking about the people? So First Nation people are something like 16% of the people, and 20% of the land, 9% of the people, 20% of the land, and they are responsible for 80% of the biodiversity, lands that are under the stewardship of First Nation people. So stop trying to think that we as whiteys or whatever need to save the world. We need to understand there's people already doing that and understanding how to do that. We need to build relationships with them. We need to understand, refine our own humility and our own place within this wider world and understand that we're part of everybody trying to meet their needs on this planet. And yes, of course, we could do that by taking control of our own lives more, but understanding that we really are just a small part of this bigger whole. How are we for time? Sorry, I've just been on the hour. I'll do in about 10 minutes if that's okay. I want to name check Robert Owen. Robert Owen, 1771 to 1858. So in 7 years, was it? No, anyway, yes. Sorry. Oh, that's what we just had his 150th. Was it 250th birthday? We just had his 250th birthday last year. That was it. Robert Owen was born in Newtown, and he was a very interesting guy in that he is responsible for creating the world's first mutual company. The first company that existed for the benefit of its customers rather than its owners. And he did this in New Lanark Mill in Scotland in the early 1800s. And from that was derived the 7 principles of cooperation, which is now a world movement of cooperatives, which involving more than 700 million people. And I think that it's the most positive movement that's happening in the world right now is cooperation and cooperatives. And again, understanding this idea of applying this idea of mutually beneficial relationships, of seeking in, Robert said a lot of different things. He was also a great observer of nature. And he said this: nature requires its own time to mature all things, whether mineral, vegetable, animal, or mind and spirit. In permaculture, we say you can't hurry the seasons. If you like, you can work with the edges by creating sunshades and wind belts and things, but you can't hurry the seasons. Nature requires its own time to mature all things, whether mineral, vegetable, animal, or mind and spirit. So is there a mind and spirit waking up going on? Is there a maturity happening globally that we now, because we've created this great peril across the world, that we can begin to understand that we actually collectively we can take a responsibility for it? I mean, that's a big jump to suggest that, but I think that that's where we're at. That's what we have to be able to do to make it to the next level, if you like. One of my heroes, someone I'm really, really fascinated with, is a woman called Lady Eve Balfour. And there she is. And she wrote a book that was published in the 1940s called The Living Soil. And this was the first real text that explained that the soil is alive, the soil is an ecosystem. She was the first person to really understand the function of mycorrhizal fungi, of this relationship of how plants actually fused with fungi to be able to adapt to living on land, and how the fungi turn out to be the important part of that. And she started writing and pointing out in 1941 that modern farming systems were going to create soil loss on a catastrophic scale, all of the things that we're now experiencing. It's very important to realize that we knew these things a long time ago and we've gone against it anyway, but by going back and seeing the insight that people had even then, we can begin to see how we might be able to repair that and move forward. So permaculture doesn't claim to be new. All it is a sort of a compendium of observations that people have been making up of the natural world all along. I live in Llanrhaeadr or Mochnant, which is just on the Welsh borders, so tucked under the Berwyn Mountains. We have the highest waterfall, single drop waterfall in, I don't know what, England and Wales or something. But it made me think, when you look at that, and you think about, this is what nature's doing all the time. This is something that we need to kind of begin to learn to think about, is how does water get clean? How is it purified? And imagine there's the rain falling over the Berwyn Mountains, over square miles of peaty soil covered in heathers and things. And think about how that water filters down through the peats, through the soils, and through all the rocks, interacts with all of those microbes and things in the soil, and eventually forms into a little tributary, a little rivulet stream, flowing over the waterfall, crashing, folding in oxygen, being aerated, being energized, and coming out the bottom, but an absolutely renewed resource. And this is just a reminder that this is what nature is doing constantly. There is no idea, the idea of being of a shortage of things is actually a lacking in our own understanding of those systems. This is the Vyrnwy Dam. This is up above where I live, and this reservoir supplies Liverpool, and it was put in 1900. This is one of the rainiest places in Britain, just up the hill from us, up the road from us. And what's interesting, of course, is that they've put the dam at the top of the hill and up in the hills, and that's because water flows downhill. So if you can catch and store water and keep it above you, you then have a resource that you can use all the time. And the genius of the Vyrnwy Dam is it can send water all the way to Liverpool without a single pump. It's just using gravity, and it's going up and down across valleys and over hills, and it's extraordinary. There's just something interesting in that. I don't really know what my point is, but it's just something interesting. But in permaculture, what we actually think is, so if you can catch and store energy, you can build resources high up in the systems. So if you have forests on the tops of mountains, those forests have rich, thick soils, which store absolutely billions of gallons of water. And when you have a big sponge on top of a mountain, when it rains, the sponge sucks it up and holds it, and then it slowly releases it over a long period of time. And that's how rivers keep flowing all year round. But with farming and agriculture and all of the things that we're doing up in the uplands, we've cut all those forests down, we've ploughed up those soils, we've drained those fields. So now when it rains, that water ends up down in the Shrewsbury and Bewdley and places like within a couple of days, where before it would be stuck, sat in the hills for months and months and months. So what we've done as we've farmed and cultivated the landscape without really understanding it properly is we're drying it out. We're creating, even in Wales, we're creating an increasingly arid world. When it gets wet in Wales, everything gets wet instantly. But if it doesn't rain for a few days, it goes really dry. And that's because we've accelerated the drainage. And again, it's a metaphor for everything that humans have done on the planet. You think about what happens when you build a city or a road or put up a big warehouse is what used to be soil that used to soak up and hold millions of tons of water is now a roof that accelerates that water off down a drain into a river, which makes that river flood. And that's, again, part of the problem of what we're doing collectively. So we need to move into a situation where everything that we're doing is about creating areas to soak up and hold water, creating places to build organic soils that are full of microbes that are also going to sequestrate soil carbon and slowly allow us to rebuild these systems. Okay, I'm gonna wind up because I've gone on. I feel like I've gone on for ages, but I just show a few pictures to go out to say is people are now doing this all over the world. These guys are in Uganda. Since I started hanging out with these guys, my whole world's expanded. Coffee growing, these steep mountainous areas there, they're using coffee growing, they're putting back the indigenous forests and then underplanting it with coffee to create a sustainable yield that allows them to regenerate the landscape. And we've been able to start bringing back small batches of this back to Wales and say it's our little shop. And it's just this thought about mutually beneficial relationships. Try and do what we can within our own communities, then reach out and find people in other communities that have the same values and try and reflect and mirror those values in whatever way you can. Think mycelial networks. Think about trading those sugars under the soils to swap minerals around so that we can build systems that meet our needs. These are some of the guys that we taught in our early permaculture courses in Uganda in 2016 and 2017 have now set up their own training centers. They're telling us that they've trained 500, 600, 700 people since. There's a guy in Kenya said he's trained 30 villages in his area in permaculture since he did his course. So patterns replicate. They replicate in unique ways, but they seem to be. It can. There's a process, I think, that we can garden, we can accelerate, we can encourage it to happen, we can support it. There's a wonderful woman in Rwanda that I started working with in 2018. She's just starting now the Rwandan Women's Permaculture Organization. She's been working with schools in southern Uganda where they built these schools on steep slopes. When it rains, like the whole mountainside just washes away. All the water comes off the roofs of the buildings and stuff. So she's built rainwater gardens that soak up it all up. And she's planted 2,000 avocado trees around a single school, in a place where there's food poverty. This is just simple design and planning and design. And again, following with a consistent set of ideas, finding out different ways to apply them in as many different areas as you can. Some of our Kenyan guys are doing these keyhole beds. It's very simple designs, showing you can try do it anywhere, using whatever you've got. You can make designs out of anything, but all you're doing, you're trying to double the depth of the topsoil, create a carbon-rich soil which will hold water. You give yourself somewhere to pour your grey water from your washing your pots, and you get nutrient-dense food. People don't eat that many greens in Africa. They don't, for some reason, have kitchen gardens. It's just taken off like an explosion. One of my students said to us the other day, 6 months after training, she said, well, we used to eat once a day, but now we eat 3 times a day, sometimes 4. And she said, oh, my kids used to get sick all the time, and now they don't. And that's just because of this, because they're doing very simple growing systems. They just haven't, no one had really pointed it out to them, but they're completely entirely made out of resources that were lying around there. It's only mud, sticks and straw and a bit of cow shit and some seeds, which albeit that can be a challenge. And then the behavior change comes because these are all cut and come greens. This is on the equator. It's sunny every day. You know, this stuff just grows and grows and grows. It's just that people hadn't thought to do that before, or to have those priorities. This is a very high rainfall area in Burundi where they're building massive swales to capture surface runoff. And in places where they haven't done it, they've got these huge gullies build up. So just by building these little permeable dams, they can slow down the stormwater, and then which then creates sediment, and then you plant trees in it, and you backfill the gullies again. So there's all these amazing, quite simple but amazing techniques now. Once people have got the concept, they start applying them. This is an old coal mine in southwest in the States somewhere. But obviously the idea is once you start to trap water on contours, and when it rains, then the soil and particulates build up behind it, seeds come in, the land starts regrowing and regenerating, that whole succession starts happening, and the forest comes back. That's what we have to do. We have to bring back the forest and the diversity of community, and the fact that we're all different and have different priorities is what makes us strong. We have to focus on the things that we agree on so we can build very strong partnerships. Don't worry about the stuff we don't agree about, just push that to the edge. As long as it's not life-threatening, we don't have to worry about it too much. There's team up with plants, team up with other people, build strategies that help you build your needs. Understand that we're part of complex ecosystems. I love this. Municipal bat roost. This is some settlement, probably in a swamp where there's loads of bats, of mosquitoes. So what do? They could have sprayed DDT everywhere, but instead you build up the bat population. So think that relationship between the termite and the giraffe again. Think about building beneficial relationships to regulate populations so we have stable systems. That's what nature does. A final quote from Robert Owen: in this new world, all will know that far more happiness can be obtained by union than by disunion. So in permaculture, we say integrate rather than segregate. Let's work together. Let's build mutual relationships. Let's build societies and processes that meet our own needs and help us move towards, you know, an abundant, harmonious future. There you go.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you, Steve.
Okay.
Just wondering if anybody's got any questions to ask you while you're here. Has anybody got any questions they'd like to ask?
It's a bit of a huge, yeah. Christopher.
Thanks, Steve. That was absolutely brilliant. And it's really nice to have a revision of, for me, having done one of your courses before in recent years, really nice to have a revision of the importance of spotting patterns despite without always needing to know what the very finest details are, which vary between people and continents. So thanks for that.
Thank you.
Have you got any advice to people that are
Katie, your audio's a bit off. Are you near the microphone?
Is it?
That's better.
Is that better?
Bit, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So have you got any advice for people like?
Gone again.
Can I say? We wrote a book a couple of years ago called Small and Slow Solutions, and it's very accessible. It's a very easy way into permaculture, and you can download it for free. And I just put the link in the chat there. And it's based on it's got lots of pictures, and it's based on really practical work we've done with our school and community here in Wales. And permaculture is more about doing it than talking about it. The ideas behind it are very important, but you really learn them by doing it. And I also do these. Yeah, sorry, any questions?
Do you have any questions you can put in the chat, or you can just unmute your mic?
Yes, question?
Ah,
Yeah.
brilliant. Hi, Chris.
Thank you. Steve, fantastic. Really enjoyed that. I mean, and I can just let me say, Robert Owen, because I'm doing a bit on Robert Owen, we've got his anniversary is coming up on the 14th of May this year.
Oh, okay.
And so there's going to be a number of Robert Owen events taking place in Wales, obviously, and around Wales. And we're trying to work on that sort of thing. Because that's, as I said, I'm very keen on the sort of cooperative and political side of things.
Yeah.
What is a bit sort of scary, though, is that your thinking is way ahead of almost everybody, you see. And it's difficult for us to all catch up. And let's be fair, presumably this audience here is trying to listen and catch up and share what you are saying, and we like and think, you know, many of the things that you're explaining, and that many will understand it as well as, or a lot better than me. And so I'm trying my best. But the wider public, I don't think they're there. I don't think they're there. So
Yeah.
I think we've got a big task ahead of us, and time is running out, and yet we've got to start somewhere.
Yeah. So is if you look at change on a graph, it's exponential. It moves towards infinity very quickly, and it turns this corner. So everything that we're talking is that change comes very quickly when it comes. Change happens, you know, slowly, then all at once. And we're on an accelerating curve, and I think that's the only way we're going to get there. So yeah, thanks for that, Debbie. I am an optimist most of the time. It's my job to be optimistic, to say, yeah, we can do this, guys. Of course, we all have our dark days, but especially with this, because we're watching the sort of edifices of what has been familiar to us just collapsing all around us, without really knowing where it's going to take us.
Yeah, and I think it's important we have talks like this getting out there, really, so people do realise there are amazing things going on, and it doesn't have to stop them, you know, it's happening. It's not just an idea in the head that
What I would say, though, as well, to go back to, I think, Christopher's point, but is, so we're interested in this sort of spiral shape, because we realize that change kind of looks like that. You've got to start from wherever you're at, and the first changes that you make, you're kind of exploring the space. What about me? What about my job? How do I relate to other people? The land, buildings, you know, how do I learn? What's my peer group? You're kind of exploring all of these ideas, and then those things start to become familiar, and then it starts to build on it. And then you start to get, oh, I know a little bit more about gardening. Oh, now I sort of get this compost thing. Oh, there is co-op structures. Okay, I know about that. And slowly, that's a sort of a pattern starts to emerge from this fog of, because we're kind of pushed into thinking all the time is you're alone. It's just down to you. You know, if you're anything that you don't achieve is your own weakness and failing. And of course, we know that isn't true, but we still feel it very easily because we, you know, if we're not flourishing, it's somehow our fault. Yeah, nice point, James. You know, money isn't the objective. Money just is to facilitate something. So again, permaculture, we're very interested in function. Why are we doing this? What's the ultimate thing? I didn't want the money. What I wanted was a home, food, companionship. You know, that's actually what I wanted. I wanted mobility. You sold me a car just a chunk of metal. What I wanted was to get around. Maybe there's better ways to do that than what the market is offering us. And to go back to, yeah, I don't know. Well, go back to Robert Owen. Let's just think about that. So in 1800, he started to articulate ideas that laid the seeds to cooperatives and mutually beneficial societies, things that benefited their stakeholders, not the owners. And that was 50, 60 years before Karl Marx wrote Das Kapital. So he informed Marx. He actually gave the sort of the socialism came after the idea of cooperatives. So think about that, and we failed to apply socialist ideology into economic systems. But socialism as a critique of capitalism is 100% right. Is that capitalism is a system that keeps falling into holes of its own making, and until it can learn that and move on, then we're going to keep repeating the same mistakes. And I think by looking back a little bit further back into time and seeing, I think Robert Owen gave us a chink into that, a vision into that. And he was, again, he was very much an observer of nature and of community.
I've got a question actually. This is more on, can you hear me?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I was just wondering, with permaculture and with it, your work you've done around Wales, are you noticing anything related to climate change, how your crops, which you've had going for, years, how they're responding seasonally? Like, are you seeing changes at that level? Because like that last summer, for instance, was my first proper go at growing, and I couldn't believe how late I had things going in, going like late October and stuff, and it was still thriving. They weren't getting moldy, so I was like, I was just wondering, from a permaculture perspective, are you seeing how they're responding?
Climate changes is something that happen over a much longer period of time. We always experience different weathers, and one year is never the same as the other. But actually, we're seeing it's in Wales. It used to rain really regularly. I wouldn't go more than a couple of weeks without it, especially in the hills. More than like about 8, 9, 10 days you get rain. And what we notice now is it really dries out, and we get colossally heavily rain. Sometimes we've had a couple of autumns, a time when it's normally rains a lot, February, March, nothing. And then it gets very hot in May, and then you think, it's going to be a glorious hot summer, and then it's wet and grey in summer, and everything goes mouldy. So yes, we're going to have to learn to deal with both drought and resilience and flood. Basically, we're going to have to work with. Understand we're going to get both extremes, and this idea about resilience. How does a system withstand external shocks? And one of the ways is it's vastly more connected and interconnected, and it has spare capacity, it has the ability to absorb a lot of rain, but also to hold it, because we're going to have a lot of, after the deluge, then we get a drought. They're really experiencing it in the tropics, so it's a big conversation in Uganda. You don't really need climate change much, so they'll be talking about it.
Thank you.
And they're farmers, so they're observing the land and they're experiencing it in a very real way. And their farming is rainwater fed. It's not irrigated, so it doesn't rain, the crops don't grow. They do have a lot of rainfall in Uganda. But yeah, we're all in it together. And to go back to the positive picture, I think, so the idea that interested me for quite a long time is how to accelerate change. And I've worked in different organizations, Centre for Definitive Technology, the Permaculture Association. I've worked in training hubs like Reading International Solidarity in New York. And I really got the most probably out of being in housing co-ops and having a chance and doing community gardening. I'm a big fan of community gardening. And I think the next step after allotments is not everybody just growing one row of carrots and one row of onions and stuff. Let's produce slightly bigger thing on slightly bigger scale. It doesn't really matter who what. Let's work together. And we did a project in Newtown, which we called Cultivate, where we had a team of 2 or 3 quite experienced horticulturists. Well, I was more a teacher and a trainer, and a couple of other very experienced horticulturists, and we coordinated about 60 people across the community gardens, and it produced absolutely a ton of veg. And what was interesting, and what the people we were working with were interested in, was not the food we produced, but the social interactions that we created by helping, reconnect socially excluded people back into the community, and all of that, like pathways back in. So I think that we could do a lot of that really quickly without it costing very much money. We could suddenly produce 25% of all our food from within the suburbs and suburban edges, out of rainwater caught off roofs and composted cardboard boxes and rotten cabbages, and worm farms and fishing barrels and mushrooms and all of that. And suddenly you haven't got food poverty anymore. Suddenly you haven't got food banks, and you've got people including. If you're hungry, come to the garden, come and get involved. In whatever way you want to feel that you can be involved, get involved. And that I would like to say cultural renaissance. Edible Wrexham. You're just anticipating that process, you know, and it's frustrating. It doesn't take off as fast as you hope it will. But what you're actually doing is preparing the ground so that when the time is ready, it really will take off. And there are places where it's really taking off. To say that seeing certain parts in East Africa where suddenly permaculture sort of peer-to-peer learning things, it's spreading like wildfire, and that's great, you know. So I'm interested in ways in which we can help, you know, cultivate that. We're all gardeners in some way. We're all somehow, you know, just tweaking and modifying the environment around us to encourage certain outcomes to happen that we want to happen. Promote the things we want to do and suppress the things we're not so interested in. But you're never going to be in control. So permaculture also talks about this Taoist thing, go with the flow a bit more. But, you know, push positively in the ways you want to go and swim against the things you don't want to go, but at the same time, you know. And that's sort of a journey that I've been on now for most of my life. And it's been interesting. Yeah.
And Chris asked, should we try a smaller experiment in Wales? Has it the scale for the trial of local food sourcing, etc.?
Yeah, so why not? Yeah, I mean, again, it's got to start somewhere. This idea of the spiral, it builds on itself. So certainly our little local food scheme in Tenerife is, it's like with a herb garden and a tiny little raised bed. Because I didn't have a garden at the time, and then I moved across the street where we do have a garden, and it's still not very big, but it's more than what we had. I managed to get a few fruit trees in and a couple of veg beds, and now we just collaborated with a neighbour up the road they just accessed 40 acres of hillside, and we're going to do a landscape regeneration project on there. So the scale comes. You've got to build the network, build the ecosystem, you know, slowly from the bottom up. You build the soil, you know, make compost. Catch and store energy is the beginning of the process. That the sun energy is coming in, how are you going to hold on to that? And also, people's energy, time's energy, money is energy, you know, information is energy. And then find ways to deploy it, to use it, to create yields, to create things that then feed that system. So you grow more green manure and put it back into your compost heap again, and it gets bigger. Throw some potatoes and, you know, compost it remains on you go. So think of that as succession, building up from what you've got. And if you start all doing that individually, you very quickly start to overlap with each other in some way or other. You find a mutual overlap and connection where you can benefit each other. Even if you're not in the same physical space, if you're in North Wales or in Poland or in Kent or whatever, we can still, especially through these kind of forums, we can build relationships and identify common themes. And stop feeling alone and isolated. Because I think, how the hell are we going to get out of this mess? With all the, you know, everything, the economic destruction and the social destruction and everything that's happened over the last sort of 12 months, built on top of all of everything that's happening before that. How are we going to get out of that? And I think we have to actively buy into, or not buy into, but actively invest time and energy into things that we want to happen, like gardening, community spaces, finding overlapping edges, things that we have in common with each other, rather than what, you were a Brexiter or a not Brexiter, or you were a vaxxer or a not vaxxer. Forget all of that. Water flows down here. Life's no fun without breakfast. Let's make some compost. Let's find that as a unifying thing. And then let's share that food together and use that to build community out of something that's real. And you haven't got to go and find an internet meme to prove that what you're thinking is right. Let's go back to what we all know that was tangibly real. And I don't know if I'm going on, this is too abstract. Like whoever it was, the question was, okay, yeah, how do we bring this into our lives? But I'm trying to say, look at the book Small and Slow Solutions, because that's the link that I put. And I also shamelessly put a link to my PDC, which we're going to be doing in April, May. 12 days, can be on farm or online. Travel Farm, very beautiful place. If we're allowed out of our rabbit hutches again ever. But we could do it on a you know, it's not as fun, but it's internet. But actually, I have been doing a bits of teaching using Zoom and Skype and stuff. And the interesting thing that can be from it is then I can link in students from Uganda and Kenya and South Africa. And actually, on my last PDC, most of the people on it were from Paris and Shropshire. And they worked with a woman from Johannesburg to design a training centre called Kula Zonke in South Africa, for Permaculture Community Centre. I thought that's really cool. And to understand we can actually collaborate globally. And we're all on this learning process, and that's a great thing to have to share with other people.
Brilliant. I think we better finish off in a minute. It's like almost past.
Yeah.
There is a question, I don't know how you can answer that. How do we get over barriers presented to us in England? For example, every square of land that can be is planning permission for as many non-eco homes as possible on it, and is sold as a premium to developers with fat wallets.
To the edges.
Oh yeah.
So you need to be able to spot the potentials of existing buildings that other people don't value, sometimes because they're not in the right place or they're the wrong shape or size. If you've got a creative problem-solving mind, then you can understand that you can stack different functions together to fit that building. I live in a 400-year-old house that has a shop built within it, and whatever, it's quirky and odd in 1,000 different ways. And it's not really quite in a place where it's easy to make a living and blah, 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 but it's sort of on an edge. But it makes it affordable if you've got the imagination to see how to make it work. Chicken Shack, our first housing cooperative, is in the southern edge of Snowdonia National Park between Cadair Idris Mountain and Cardigan Bay, you know, just but on an edge. But it made it cheap. It was with 8 people in. We bought a house that 8 people would live in for 110 grand. I'm not saying, I know, whatever. So I'm not saying it's easy. I'm just saying it is possible. It is actually possible. But you have to look to the edges and be creative, because you're not going to be able to change. This is the permaculture observed idea that we're very interested in, is the idea of edges. And that change often happens at edges, and new ideas penetrate from edges. Think social edges. Think not in the mainstream. Weeds don't get established in the middle of your big monocrop field of wheat. They come from the edges. That's where the diversity is at. And so you guys are on a social, cultural edge, and you're just on a leading edge of succession. There are people behind you who will start catching up with you as you move forward. But so don't just think, oh, I'm the only person who thinks like this. You're just on your edge, if you like. There's people behind you who are one step behind. So as you start moving into it and you start making sense, you actually start opening up habitat for other people to come in, and that's how these ideas start to mainstream. So some of the things, I mean, I've covered more ground in an hour with you guys than I probably would have done on several days 10 years ago, 20 years ago, because we're already conversant with a lot of these concepts, right? So, and again, so that is how change accelerates. So understand every bit of new territory that you're colonizing, you're opening up vast swathes of opportunities downstream of you, or upstream of you, whatever the metaphor is, but you know what I mean. Yeah.
Oh, beautiful. Thanks. And some wise words from Frank, who's got amazing projects as well. Hopefully he'll share with us sometime. Yeah, but yeah, I think it's past. I suppose we better go. But thank you so much, Steve.
Yeah,
That's
okay.
really, really beneficial. I could just keep talking.
Thanks,
for
Steve.
ages.
Much apprecited.
Yeah, I used to be an economics teacher, Frank, so I'd love to get into that one another time. But yeah.
Yeah, you got to link up. He's got there's Wellhouse in near Ceredigion, isn't it, Frank? That's working lots of gift economy.
Yeah, no, I love it. Yeah, but what I meant was it's not an end in itself. It's something that helps you access something. Yeah. So on the final thing I'd say about money is money. You need to understand it. But is so this housing club that I live in now, Dragons, in Llanryddan, is we bought it in 2015, and it is funded 100% with other people's money. I have a £1 share in that is it. And so do the other members. We pay £380 a month rent to share the house. We each have our own, little living space. We share a kitchen and living room. So 3 straightforward. It works, and it's not saying it's easy all the time. And I'm not saying it was easy to do it with 100% borrow money, because it isn't. But what I can say is it's possible.
That's all we need, isn't it? Really, it's possible. That
I'll end on that.
window, isn't it? That window of possibility we can walk through. I hope so.
Come and contact me through Sector 39. I do, whatever. We can have individual chats or whatever's useful.
Definitely, and in the permaculture course as well, you can bend Steve's ear, lots to expect.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Okay.
Awesome.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Bye.
All the
Thank
best.
you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Reason.
Bye-bye.
Bye.